Good evening and welcome to the Redwood Library in Athenæum. My name is Benedict Lecca, Executive Director, and we are pleased to welcome back Dr. Markward for the ever-popular Music Appreciation Series. And I want to thank our generous sponsor of the series, the Jarzembek family, Mark Jarzembek and Michelle Drum. Tonight, Dr. Markward will be presenting our dear friend Carolyn DuPont's favorite musician, J.S. Bach, and the Christmas Oratorio, 6 cantatas for 6 days of Christmas. So please welcome Dr. Markward and happy holidays to everyone.
Thank you, Benedict, and may I echo Benedict's comment, happy holidays to you all. I hope you have great holidays and can be refreshed for the new year, which incidentally, we will be celebrating the 275th anniversary of the Redwood Library in Athenæum. And welcome back, Carolyn. Here we go with Bach. We're going to talk this evening about the Weihnachtsoratorium, or the Christmas Oratorio. And I need to mention a couple of things about it before we get to the music. First of all, it's not as popular as Handel's Messiah, and I'd like to spend a little time examining the reasons why that might be so. First of all, there's a language barrier. Of course, it was written in German, and the entire 6 cantatas are comprised of both biblical and a libretto by a gentleman by the name of Picander, who was also the librettist for St. Matthew and St. John Passion of Bach and several of the cantatas. At the time Bach was working on the Christmas Oratorio in 1734 and 1735 Christmas season, he had also been working on the Ascension Oratorio for Easter and the Easter Oratorio. And the Easter Oratorio itself is lifted almost verbatim from a pastoral cantata, an earlier work. All 3 of these works have in common a term called parody. And let me explain what parody is, because it's so important not only to this particular work of Bach, but many of the cantatas, and also to many other Baroque composers, including Handel. You may remember when we think about Messiah that the great chorus for "Unto us a child is born" is lifted note for note from an earlier duet in Italian for 2 sopranos by Handel also. Handel also lifted some material in Messiah from Arcangelo Corelli and others, and himself. Parody can take 2 forms. One is a musical parody in which the tune exists and a new text is overlaid. You may all remember the great Civil War song, Oralee, which became, for Elvis Presley, Love Me Tender. The other way, the poetic parody, may be found in a piece called Away in a Manger, a Christmas carol that we love, but there are 2 versions of it. Another kind of parody would be lifting the words, putting the words, "My country 'tis of thee," to a tune which is "God Save the King" or Queen, depending on who is in office at the time. Other differences between the 2, Messiah and the Christmas Oratorio, is that Christmas is a fixed feast. It always occurs on December 25th, whereas Easter is a moving feast, a movable feast, and occurs on the first Sunday after the vernal equinox. In English-speaking countries, Messiah, of course, remains the most performed of all Christmas works. However, we must remember that Messiah was originally intended and originally performed during the Easter season. It was performed in April on Good Friday in its first iteration. In addition to the language difference, the approach is somewhat different. Handel, of course, was writing opera for most of his life, and he was writing for more common people to appreciate what he was composing. Bach always thought that he was writing for God. And indeed, Bach's choral writing is much more akin to his instrumental writing than it is to other vocal music of the time, such as Handel's or Corelli's or Alessandro Scarlatti or any number of Baroque giants we could name. So the language is a problem, and there are several English versions which we could use, and I'm much less a purist than I was formerly. I thought we had to do it in German because the text fit the music so well. However, there are some excellent English versions, and the last time I did this 4 years ago, we did an English version, and it worked out quite nicely, especially because Bach uses extended recitatives to tell the story. An oratorio is similar to an opera in that it is comprised of soloists, chorus, orchestra, recitative, or that is the telling of the story which propels the story forward, and then arias and choruses which may be commentary on the actual narrative but don't advance the plot if there is such. The other thing is that Bach uses biblical verses much more than Handel in this, and Handel has no story in Messiah. And again, if you listen to the opening, which we will in a few minutes, of the Christmas Oratorio, it is very jubilant and uplifting, whereas the overture to Messiah is rather downtrodden and, of course, forecasts the passion of Christ. Another problem with this work, if it is a problem, that is, if we are to do it in one sitting, that no two of the 6 cantatas are of the same orchestration. The first part 1, is for 2 flutes, 2 oboes, including d'amore, bassoon, 3 trumpets, timpani, organ, and strings. Part 2, 2 flutes, 4 oboes, including 2 oboe d'amore, 2 oboe da caccia, hunting oboes, lower in pitch, more like brass instruments, and they're only used in this particular movement. And so it goes. The last movement, again, the trumpets return with the oboes, the bassoon, the organ, and strings. Also, the recitatives are much longer. And if you're waiting for arias to occur, you have a longer wait in the Christmas Oratorio. So we are faced with these problems when we want to perform it in a single setting or a single sitting, which Bach never heard in his life because he didn't intend it that way. Part 1 is the birth, the first day of Christmas on 12/25. Part 2 is the Annunciation of the Shepherds, which is the second day of Christmas. The third day, 12/26, St. Stephen's Day or Boxing Day, you may recall what that is. Part 3 is the Adoration of the Shepherds. Part 4, the circumcision and the naming of Jesus on New Year's. Part 5 is the Journey of the Magi. And part 6 is the Adoration of the Magi, which occurs on the Feast of Epiphany. So the other thing about this work is that it was intended as a whole, hence the name Oratorio, Christmas Oratorio, but to be performed on 6 separate days, unlike Messiah. The parody process we have talked about. For instance, the first chorus we'll hear right now is Jauchzet frohlocket, and that means shout and praise. It comes note by note, note for note, from Turnet ihr Pauken, erschallet den Trumpet, and that means resound the timpani and resound the trumpet. And Bach laid over, with the help of Picander, the text for the Christmas Oratorio. If you give me a second, I will try to read that translation for you so you know what we're talking about. Jauchzet frohlocket aufpreiset die Tage. Celebrate, rejoice, rise up and praise these days. glorify what the highest has done today, abandon despair, banish laments, sound forth full of delight and happiness, etc. So it's a very jubilant chorus with three trumpets, the oboes, bassoon, and flutes as well. And he layers and piles on top the excitement as it builds through the iterations of the chorus. There is a B section or a middle section to this chorus. This chorus is in the da capo form, or from the head, which means that this first part that you just heard will be repeated. And almost all of the arias, or ariosos or airs, as Handel would call them, are of the da capo nature as well, which makes even a longer song than you would normally find. And the Baroque period, the da capo was the rule of the day. So let me play you a bit of the B section. It's much contrasting, it's much gentler. And then the first part repeats, again in the glorious fashion that we've heard already. Note the rising scales and for the re-entry of the trumpet. This is pretty exciting opening to a piece, and we can't wait to see what comes next. Etc. I mentioned that there are recitatives or recitations in this and in Handel's Messiah as well. They are of two kinds in both pieces, actually. what we call secco or dry recitative, which is the tenor reading or saying, actually singing, but reciting the text from the Bible. In this case that I'm going to play for you, this secco recitative or dry recitative, and I think you'll understand the term when you hear how little the instruments play. Only occasionally the organ and the cello have anything melodic. It's basically chords allowing the tenor, the evangelist in this case, to tell the story uninterrupted. This text is, and it came to pass at that time, however, that a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole world should be taxed. And I think you know the rest of it. Here's that recitative.
Es begab sich aber zu der Zeit, dass ein Gebot von dem Kaiser Augusto ausging, dass alle Welt geschätzet würde, und jedermann ging, dass sich schätzen ließe, ein jeglicher in seine Stadt. Da machte sich auch auf Josef aus Galiläa, aus der Stadt Nazareth in das jüdische Land, zur Stadt David, die da heißet Bethlehem. Darum, dass von dem Hause und Geschlechte David war, auf dass sich schätzen ließe mit Maria, seinem vertrauten Weibe, die war schwanger. Und als sie da selbst waren, kam die Zeit, dass sie gebären sollte.
The time came for her to deliver. Next, and we'll move right on to what is known as a recitativo accompagnato, or an accompanied recitative. And in this case, there is more substantive orchestra behind the singer. Yet the story goes on, and it is recitative, telling of the story, advancing the plot, as it were. And this follows the marvelous aria, Berechte dich, Zion, prepare yourself, Zion, with tender efforts to behold your lovely one, your beloved, near you so soon. The recitative is now my dearest bridegroom, and we know that the reference happens frequently between the bride and the bridegroom. Now the hero from David's branch, for the comfort, for the salvation of the earth, etc. Let's listen to a little bit of that. It's the mezzo soprano, accompanied with by the orchestra. Accompanied by oboes and bassoon. Etc. And as I mentioned, it's followed by this lovely aria, which is also a da capo aria, and it is also part of the parody process. This is Prepare Yourself, Zion. It formerly came from an aria, it was formerly an aria, Ich will dich nicht hören, I will not hear you, which is a commentary or mood setting from the cantata Hercules. Bach, incidentally, the parody process works generally 95% of the time from the secular origin to the sacred, which makes sense for Bach since he was always writing for the greater glory of God. discussed many times, in the Baroque, most of the forms are based on dance. And I think you can hear that quite readily here. And as in almost all da capo arias, there is this A section, which you just heard, or the first section. There will be a contrasting second section or B section. And then the A section, Bereite dich Zion, will be repeated. In Handel, when one does that, one usually ornaments. The difference between Handel and Bach, or one of the differences, is that Handel expected, being from the operatic background that he was, that singers would ornament, much as you find later in the operas of Donizetti and Bellini and Rossini. Bach, when he wants ornaments, he generally writes them in. Remember that Handel was writing for professional singers and Bach was writing for less so. As I mentioned, and as you can tell, there are many repeated words in these arias. So the plot or the story is not advanced, but is a commentary by the soloist on what has come before in the recitative, which is biblical. We now move to the next item, which is a very famous chorale. It's called the Passion Chorale, and it's probably best known to us as O Sacred Head Now Wounded. It appears in the Christmas Oratorio in part 1, which we are going to hear, to the text, Wie soll ich dich empfangen? How shall I receive you? It's a chorale by Martin Luther. And then we will hear it as the very last item 3 hours later in the Christmas Oratorio, as it ends the Christmas Oratorio. The Passion Chorale is found in St. John and St. Matthew. It is also in St. Matthew 5 times and with a different harmonization each time. I think it shows also that for Bach, at least, being the religious scholar that he was, as well as a genius musician, that the death of Jesus Christ is also inextricably bound up in the birth of him as well. So here's that marvelous chorale, if I can get there, thank you. I'm sorry, I should have given you the entire translation. How shall I embrace you and how encounter you, O desire of the whole world, O adornment of my soul, O Jesus, Jesus, place the torch near me yourself, so that what gives you pleasure be known and familiar to me. You have noticed, I'm sure, that the chorale was accompanied by the full orchestra minus the trumpets and timpani. Also, what we know is that the congregation would have sung the hymns or the chorales in these pieces, Messiah, St. John, St. Matthew, and the four that are put into the Magnificat on occasion, Bach's other great religious work. The chorales would have been known to the congregation and they would have sung along even in a performance of this Christmas oratorio. We move to part 2, which is the Annunciation of the Shepherds. And it starts as Messiah begins the second half of part 1 with a pastoral symphony. And here is again one of the problematic parts of doing a complete Christmas oratorio, is that you have to have 2 oboes d'amore and 2 oboes da caccia, meaning 4 oboes, and they also have to play regular oboes in other movements. And this is the only place that all 4 are employed in this one cantata out of 6. In addition, flutes, bassoon, and strings, and organ. And so on. It's exactly the same place followed by exactly the same text as Messiah. You remember in Messiah, there are 4 soprano recitatives, beginning with, and there were shepherds in the same fields near the sheepfolds who guarded their flock by night, or in Handel's version, it's a bit different. And in Messiah, they are followed by the chorus, glory to God, and then rejoice greatly, and so on, but they're tied together. And so often when one hears Messiah, things are not tied together as I think they should be. In the case of Bach, you have no choice, because the recitative, which we're about to hear, and there were shepherds in the field, leads directly to one of the great chorales, again by Martin Luther, Brich an, o schönes Morgenlicht, break forth, O beauteous heavenly light. Here's the recitative.
Und es waren Hirten in derselben Gegend auf dem Felde bei den Hürden, die hüteten des Nachts ihre Herde. Und siehe, des Herrn Engel trat zu ihnen, und die Klarheit des Herrn leuchteten sie. Und sie furchten sich sehr.
as I said, this occurs in the same place as the angels appearing to the shepherds occur in Handel's Messiah. So here we now have another one of those dry or secco recitatives. Und alsobald war dabei dem Engel die Menge der himmlische Heerscharen. And immediately with the angel, there was a throng of heavenly hosts who praised God and said, remember, praising God and saying, glory to God in Messiah. And here it leads directly to the chorus of the angels, Ehre sei Gott in der Höhe, glory be to God in the highest, and peace on earth, and a happy occurrence for humanity.
Und alsobald war da bei dem Engel die Menge der himmlischen Heerscharen, die lobten Gott und sprachen.
Contrasting B section, and we'll return again to the Ehre sei Gott, the A section, which is fast. A section. Another difference between Messiah or Handel's oratorios and Bach's is in Bach we often have the insertion of the chorales in the Lutheran service, which these oratorios were part of the service. You may remember that Handel's Messiah was premiered in Dublin, and it was not in a service, it was a concert. Here, Bach, again, wrote these 6 cantatas to be performed in a church service. Also, St. Matthew and St. John were to be performed in the church service. And if you think it's tough sitting through this talk, imagine Good Friday in 1727 when you went to church at St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, and you had an hour sermon to look forward to, the rest of the liturgy, and a 3-hour production of the St. Matthew Passion. Well, there was no internet or no TV to go home to. Moving ahead to another example of the recitative leading directly into the next chorus. And this is, again, the same kind of a thing that Handel uses. If you recall in part 2 of Messiah, the part that deals with the passion of Jesus, the tenor sings, all they that see him laugh him to scorn. They shoot out their lips and shake their heads, saying, and the chorus sings, he trusted in God that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him if he delight in him. The tenor then sings, thy rebuke hath broken his heart. He is full of heaviness. He looked for some to have pity on him, but there was no man. neither found he any to comfort him. The tenor sings, behold and see if there be any sorrow like unto his sorrow. And it goes on, but they are all connected. The same thing happens here. And when the angels went away from them towards heaven, the shepherds said to one another, let us now go towards Bethlehem. And you will hear them not just going towards Bethlehem, but running towards Bethlehem as you listen closely to the orchestra part.
Und da die Engel von ihnen gen Himmel fuhren, sprachen die Hirten untereinander.
Listen to the violins.
Und sie kamen eilend und funden beide.
Excuse me. And they came hastily and found both Mary and Joseph along with the child lying in the manger. When they had seen it, however, they spread word around that had been spoken about this child, and everyone to whom it came marveled at the sayings that the shepherds had told them. Mary, however, kept all these words and pondered them in her heart. And that is the recitative, followed by this beautiful aria, enclose my heart, these blessed miracles fast within your faith. And it is with a violin obbligato. And one of Bach's favorite devices in these tender and sometimes pitying arias, this one happens to be more tender, in St. Matthew, or Barmedich is a pitying sort of text. And also in the bass cantata, Ich habe genug, it is a pitying text, I have enough. And he uses the violin obbligato in a most tender and interesting fashion, I think. Here is first the recitative. We won't play all of it.
Und sie kamen eilend und funden beide, Maria und Josef, dazu das Kind in der Krippe liegen. Da sie es aber
Every now and then there is a tenderness in the text. And he found Maria and Joseph with the child lying in a manger. And you heard that little melody in the cello accompanying that sentiment.
Da sie es aber gesehen hatten, breiteten sie das Wort aus, welches zu ihnen von diesem Kind gesaget war.
Whenever he speaks of the kid or the child or Maria, Mary,
wunderten sich der Rede, die ihnen die Hirten gesaget hatten.
Maria kept these things and pondered them in her heart.
Maria aber behielt alle diese Worte und bewegte sie in ihrem Herzen.
In her heart. Enclose my heart, these blessed miracles, fast within your faith. Let these wonders, these divine works, forever be reinforcement of your weak faith. Back to the A section. Time marches on, as do we. You note on your screen that Karen Jackson Geary wrote wonderful violin obligato. Certainly Karen would know that. Karen is a violinist. We probably did well over 30 concerts together when she lived here in Rhode Island. She is now one of our faithful members tuning in from North Carolina, and I'm always grateful to see her name. Bach's fiddle parts, if you noticed in the, I might go back and play this again. Just give me a sec. It's a good time to tell you that this is a recording. Some of you may remember this, the Musical Heritage Society, which shows you how long I've had this. The conductor is Helmut Rilling. It's the Geschlinger Kantorei, the singers, and the Stuttgart Bach Collegium. And it's fantastic. This is the only place in this entire recording that I have a problem. Because if you can't hear the violins running off to Bethlehem as the shepherds sing, "Let us now go to Bethlehem," I think the violins get shortchanged in the recording here. Listen carefully. I'm of the opinion as a conductor that anyone who has to work that hard to play that many notes deserves to be heard. We move now to part 4. For the circumcision and naming of Jesus, this would have occurred on New Year's Day or the 8th day of Christmas. And what we listen to here are the 2 French horns. This is the only cantata in which the French horns are utilized. And as you listen to them, I want you to imagine that they would be played on valveless hunting horns. That is, all the pitch changing would have been done with the lips and the breath. The text is "Fallt mit Danken, fallt mit Loben." Fall with gratitude and fall with praise. Note that whenever the text is "Fallt mit Danken," fall with thanks or kneel with thanks, it is a descending line to the text, to the word danken. And when it is loben for praise, it is a rising line to the word for praise. Fall before the Almighty's throne of grace. God's Son desires to become the Savior and Redeemer of the world. God's Son suppresses the rage and fury of the enemy. Missed it by 1. Very high horn parts. And then, of course, it's a da capo chorus as well. And it's one of the demanding things that Bach does. And I know so well, having conducted many Bach da capo choruses in St. John and in this particular work and others, the chorus gets through once and it says da capo, you mean we have to go back and sing this all again? It can be quite wearing. And again, it points to the fact that Bach composed instrumentally, and singers were expected to sing those instrumentally adept lines. However, the other thing about Bach is that all the things that he wrote, the Brandenburg Concerti, the four suites, the solo partitas, all were to the greater glory of God. To him, there was no difference from the secular to the sacred, except that when he did this parody thing that we talked about early on, when he used new sacred words and set to what was formerly a secular tune, he was raising that particular tune. And other reasons he used parody was to make sure that something that was written for one occasion, the music might survive and be repeated several times, even though to a new text. So he was thinking out, or watching out for himself in that regard, in one way, guarding his immortality. Another reason he used this parody technique was because of deadlines. If he had Picander to write a text that would match the existing melody, so much the better. We now move to the end of part 6. We're going to skip part 5, time's running on here. And part 6 is for the Epiphany. It is the visitation of the Magi. Part 5 deals with the trip, the sojourn of the Magi and the Annunciation. And this deals with the actual act of bending before the crib. It ends, as I mentioned earlier, with, again, the Passion Chorale in a very uplifting, 3-trumpet-filled chorus that shows that Bach, again, thought that the birth and the resurrection or the passion of Christ were intermingled. How can hell frighten us now? And all 4 soloists get a shot at this verse. And then we have the great final chorus to this wonderful work. Nun seid ihr wohl gerochen. Now you are well avenged upon the horde of your enemies, since Christ has pulverized what was contrary to you. Death, devil, sin, and hell are weakened once and for all. The place of the people is next to God. In summation, because I want to end with the music, the evangelist, in a synopsis of what we've talked about, the evangelist tells the story as found in Matthew and Luke in the Bible. The soloist, the chorus, and the orchestra are the mood setters or commentators on the story, much as they are in opera. And Bach interprets the story through his use of chords, melody, harmony, and, as we found out, through his orchestration. The 3 composers that we've talked about most during the course of this past year have been Mozart, Beethoven, and Bach. Mozart in his opera conveys a whole range of human emotions, from the absurd to an elevated human state to almost sainthood when it comes to the Countess in The Marriage of Figaro. Beethoven, his music tells us a lot about Beethoven personally and how he feels about a variety of situations and conditions. All of Beethoven's music is very personal, struggling intensely, and with the outside forces of the universe. Bach tells us what it's like to be human as part of the universe, and also to have aspirations to the Godhead beyond. I wish you all the very best of the holidays. I so enjoy coming to you in this fashion and being able to share some musical insights that I've gathered through the years. I hope you have a wonderful 2022. Bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Markward. Always just amazing, and this music is just so incredible. So thank you so much, and I want to thank Carolyn DuPont again, who is the person who introduced us to Dr. Markward, and he's just such a treasure for us. It's just remarkable, his knowledge and what he does. So this is our last event for 2021. And we're very much looking forward to celebrating next year, 2022, our 275th anniversary, with a lot of good stuff, diverse and exciting lineup of events, including, and Dr. Markward and I are going to sit down and we're going to negotiate hard. No, it's easy. Just yes, please, thank you, and more. So anyways, I digress. I want to thank him again and thank you all very much for your support. If you're not a member, come on over. If you're not subscribed on this YouTube channel that we have, please do. And until next year, when we celebrate our 275th, I want to wish everyone a very happy holiday season. Thank you all so much. Thank you.